As coronavirus deaths continue to rise in the United States, President Trump presses state governors to lift statewide stay-at-home orders in efforts to reopen our nation's economy. Stimulus checks have hit the accounts of many Americans. However, are these funds too little, too late to help the millions across the country recover from this devastating disease? We will discuss that and more today. I'm your host, Eric Wright, and this is the Closet Conservative Podcast. As of Friday, COVID-19 has infected over 680,000 and taken the lives of over 35,000 Americans. In some parts of the country, new infections seem to have slowed. And this latest revelation has prompted President Trump to urge governors across the nation with plateaued rates to step into reopening their states and to step away from stay-at-home orders that have disabled local, state, and ultimately our national economy. On Thursday, during his daily COVID-19 news briefing, President Trump outlined steps for the responsible reopening of our country. And before taking the podium, Trump held a conference call with governors across the country to urge them to take a look at measures of restarting their states, but ultimately stating that they would be calling their own shots. And as Trump put it, these reopening efforts would lead to the rejuvenation of our nation. These new guidelines meant to speed Trump's goal of restarting the country will not be mandatory. Many governors have already extended restrictions into mid-May or banded into regional collectives that will determine their reopening plans. And while POTUS understands that some states like New York and New Jersey will not be ready for reopening for quite some time, other states like Montana, Wyoming, and North Dakota could be prepared to resume normal business as soon as tomorrow. Throughout the country, people are becoming impatient, accusing state governors and leaders of killing their livelihoods. In states such as Kentucky, Michigan, Ohio, and North Carolina, citizens have had enough of COVID-19 shelter-in-place policies, and they have organized protests to demand the immediate reopening of their states. Like many others across the country, Michiganders, for example, are struggling as Governor Gretchen Whitmer has extended the state's stay-at-home order until at least April the 30th. Businesses and schools remain closed across the nation, and these closures are sending Americans into emotional peril. Suicide rates are climbing. Domestic and substance abuse is on the rise as people find themselves trapped with no job, no paycheck, and for some, no end in sight. On Wednesday, the IRS began depositing stimulus checks into the accounts of many Americans, and for those in need, this money could not have come at a better time. For many, however, a sense of desperation has set in due to this disease. This feeling cannot be felt more than for those small business owners who learned this week that the $350 billion set aside in the CARES Act is spent. For President Trump and Republican members of Congress, more money is needed, and now, for businesses across the nation. For Pelosi and her comrades, continued political pandering and pouting continue to interfere with progress. The House Speaker continues to state that Congress will undertake no new funding measures unless guarantees are set aside for minorities and other cherry-picked pork barrel liberal projects. And the result has been devastating. Republicans and Democrats have been at stalemate over the scope of this bill, with Democrats pushing for more money for hospitals and state and local governments, as well as the small business loan program known as the Paycheck Protection Program. Republicans have argued that the next bill should be focused solely on the PPP, which was initially granted $350 billion in funds from the stimulus package, which ran out of money late Thursday. This week, the U.S. Labor Department stated that jobless claims hit 5.2 million, totaling over 22 million for the month. And that was 1.37 million lower than the previous week, a sign perhaps that both COVID-19 and its economic destruction have plateaued. But no matter the decline, these job losses have erased all job gains since the Great Recession, and for many, an immediate return to work is unlikely. For Democrats and the president, a battle across social media has resulted. After the president tweeted "Liberate Minnesota" on Friday morning, as well as "Liberate Michigan" and "Liberate Virginia" and "Save your great Second Amendment, it is under siege," online far-right communities speculated over whether Trump was advocating armed conflict. Of course, these fan-flaming comments come from the mouths of liberal media outlets such as NBC News, who have from the start spewed their hatred for our 45th president. Washington Governor Jay Inslee said Trump was fomenting domestic rebellion with his tweets about liberating states under stay-at-home orders. According to NBC again, Trump's tweets echoed messaging from right-wing protesters who have demonstrated against the laws, and they raised concerns that the president's supporters would feel encouraged to ignore social distancing guidelines. Andrew Cuomo criticized Trump after the president lashed out against the New York governor in a tweet. In response to Trump's suggestion that Cuomo should spend more time doing and less time complaining, the governor responded, "If he's sitting at home watching TV, maybe he should get up and go to work." And lastly, what could end this week without sleepy Joe Biden echoing some Rip Van Winkle rhetoric? On Friday, Biden accused Trump of trying to rewrite history on how he responded to the coronavirus. "The uncomfortable truth is that Donald Trump left America exposed and vulnerable to this pandemic," Biden said in a new video released on Friday. "He ignored the warnings of health experts and the intelligence agencies and put his trust in China's leaders instead." Now look, I know that Sleepy Joe has catnapped since his tenure as vice president, and as a result, must have forgotten his and then President Obama's response to the H1N1 viral pandemic. The CDC, folks, estimated that from April the 12th of 2009 to April the 10th of 2010, there were 60.8 million H1N1 cases, with 275,000 hospitalizations and near 12,500 deaths in the U.S. alone. Now look, sure, COVID-19 has taken 3 times as many as American lives as H1N1. However, the former vice president is hardly the voice of reason when it comes to any domestic or international response to either viral pandemics, economic action, or international terrorism. Here is what the Obama administration and Joe Biden as vice president left us Americans after their 8-year reign. I want to share with you today a detailed report from Pew Research on the effectiveness of the Obama-Biden administration, and if elected, what Sleepy Joe would yet again bring to our nation. So, according to the report, Americans' trust in the federal government remained mirrored at historic lows under Obama-Biden. Elected officials were held in such low regard that more than half of the public said in a fall 2015 survey that ordinary Americans would do a better job of solving national problems. Also, according to Pew, Americans felt disillusioned with the way that Washington responded to the financial meltdown of 2008. Also in 2015, 7 in 10 Americans said that the government's policies following the recession generally did little or nothing to help middle-class people. A roughly equal share said that the government's post-recession policies did a great deal or a fair amount to help large banks and financial institutions and did absolutely nothing to help those on Main Street America. And against the backdrop of global terrorism, including several attacks on American soil, Americans also became less confident in the ability of their government to handle threats. In 2015, following significant attacks in Paris and San Bernardino, California, the public's concerns about terrorism surged and positive ratings of the government's handling of terrorism plummeted to a post-9/11 low. Some word of advice to Joe Biden, like Rip Van Winkle, crawl back up underneath the tree and sleep for another 20 years. You have done nothing for our country, and you will do nothing for our country. Today, Americans are in a state of fear. They are worried about their livelihoods, where their next paycheck will come from, how can they afford their home, their car, food, and medical care for their families. President Trump has and will continue to lay out the ineffectiveness of our legislative government. Congress, especially those on the left, are utterly out of touch with daily American life. And you add a deadly virus into the mix, and chaos results. The lifelong, blood-sucking Democratic politicians have no concept of what is vital, what is essential to our nation. Our country is made up of commerce, big and small, from the Fortune 500s to the small-town bakery, which is now closed, all because they cannot provide to-go or pick up curbside. The most significant issue with these congressional clowns of the left is, for many, they don't have a clue about business. They've never owned a business. Their life of luxury has come on the backs of hard-working, blue-collar Americans who are now reeling in desperation over this disease, and who now find themselves out of money, out of a job, and frankly, out of time. The time for this country to open back up is now. And as Americans, we must be responsible for the decisions and the measures in which this is conducted. However, for the do-nothing Democrats, inaction is killing our economy. It is killing our citizens. It is killing our way of life. Our nation was founded on life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And as a nation, we need to grab the hand of our neighbors, pull ourselves up by our bootstraps, and get our country back to work. Folks, as I close today's episode, I want to announce the start of a new show here at the Premier Media Group. Please check out the Jared Dyson Show, available now for download. For those who have followed us over the last year, Jared Dyson is a name and voice cemented in providing conservative thought and debate among the weeds of today's fuzzy liberal thinking. Jared hosted the Closet Conservative for the last year here at Premier, so switch on over, check him out. You'll be glad you did. I want to thank you all again for tuning in today, and as always, be safe, be mindful, but most of all, be American. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe to our podcast. Please remember to give a 5-star review and share our podcast with your friends. The Closet Conservative Podcast is a production of the Liberty Loft. Copyright The Liberty Loft 2020. You can find more shows and information on our website, www.thelibertyloft.com, or any of our social media channels.